Games of all kinds have existed for nearly as long as recorded history. Some games in our own world have been around for well over 5,000 years. But what about within the world of Middle-earth? As with so many things, Tolkien would indeed add games and sports into his writings, giving us a greater glimpse into his created world. Today on Nerd of the Rings, and in honor of the amazing time I had at Gen Con this year, we cover the in-world games of Middle-earth. Likely the most widely known example of a game in Middle-earth is also its most humorous. While we sometimes find the narrator of The Hobbit referencing things known only to present-day readers, there are others explicitly within Middle-earth itself. In the very first chapter of the book, we read about Bullroarer Took, the famous hobbit so large he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their king Gulfinbull's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same moment. While we are not told of any golf courses or a Shire Open, it does seem some variation of golf was indeed played by hobbits after the great deeds of Bullroarer. But golf is far from the only game mentioned in Tolkien's writings. It's not even the only one mentioned within The Hobbit. Later in the book, we find a list of games that Bilbo was known to spend a deal of his time playing. The first of these is quoits, a ring toss game, which coincidentally, I played a bit of while visiting the Hobbiton movie set in New Zealand. Next, Bilbo is said to have participated in dart throwing. The very same game found in pubs the world over today found its real-world origin in the medieval days of the 1300s. Next in the list is a game called Shooting at the Wand. This is actually an archery game, where a narrow strip of wood is used as the target. An interesting point here, of course, being that Bilbo had at least some skill at shooting a bow. Another game in both Middle-earth and today's world is called bowls. Also known as lawn bowling, this activity involves players rolling their ball, called a bowl, and attempting to land it as close as possible to a smaller ball, known as a jack. Somewhat similar in nature is Nine Pins, a game very similar to bowling where the player's goal is to knock down pins. Unlike the 10-pin bowling many will imagine, 9-pin is quite different, not only in the number of pins and their arrangement, but also in that the scoring is simpler, with a maximum score of 9 each frame. In the same paragraph where these several Hobbit games are mentioned, we also find that Bilbo was skilled at other quiet games of the aiming and throwing sort. Clearly, the Shire folk enjoyed many a game in their land. Another that makes a great deal of sense, given what we know of Hobbits' general ability to hide, is hide and seek. Once again, in The Hobbit, Bilbo mentions this game. "Confound you, Smaug, you worm," he squeaked aloud. "Stop playing hide and seek. Give me a light and then eat me if you can catch me." This is actually a game that's also mentioned in The Lord of the Rings as well. As we read in the Tower of CIrith Ungol, Sam had no time to think. He might have slipped out of the other door, but hardly without being seen, and he could not have played hide and seek with this hideous orc for long. He did what was probably the best thing he could have done. He sprang out to meet Shagrat with a shout. But what of the other realms of Middle-earth? Well, it turns out that it was not only the Hobbit lands where Tolkien would mention games and sporting competition. Going back to some of the earliest days of the world, thousands of years before hobbits would enter into existence, we find Galadriel during her days in Valinor. Here, in the pages of Unfinished Tales, it is said, "She grew to be tall beyond the measure even of the women of the Noldor. She was strong of body, mind, and will, a match for both the lore masters and the athletes of the Eldar in the days of their youth." While Lore Master is a title expected to be found in Middle-earth, this is confirmation that the elves indeed took part in organized athletic events. But it's not the elves only who seem to enjoy sports. For also, in Unfinished Tales, it says, "But no man wore a sword in Numenor, and for long years few indeed were the weapons of warlike intent that were made in the land. Axes and spears and bows they had, and shooting with bows on foot and on horseback was a chief sport and pastime of the Numenorians." It then goes on to say, "Beyond all other pursuits, the strong men of Numenor took delight in the sea, in swimming, in diving, or in small craft for contests of speed in rowing or sailing." So in the land of Numenor, one could find archery on foot and horseback, as well as swimming, diving, rowing, and sailing, all in contests of skill. Going back to the Hobbit, another sport mentioned solely there is football, or as Americans would say, soccer. It is mentioned by Thorin Oakenshield when the company is making their way through the Misty Mountains and they encounter the stone giants.
"This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football."
A second mention comes later in the tale after the dwarves have been captured by the spiders of Mirkwood. There was life in Bombur still. There was a noise like the kicking of a flabby football, and the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching itself with its own thread just in time. It's important to note that this second mention comes from the narrator of The Hobbit, who is, as I said earlier, known to use modern-day terminology in descriptions. However, the first mention by Thorin certainly stands, seeming to imply that the dwarves played some variation of football. Historically, there were indeed some sports resembling modern-day football played in the Middle Ages, and would likely fit well within Tolkien's world. As far as other physically demanding games, we also see multiple references to wrestling. In The Return of the King, we find Pippin in Minas Tirith, where he spends time with Baragon's son, Beargil. And when the young Gondorian asks Pippin's age, Pippin responds, "I am nearly 29, so I pass you there, though I am but 4 feet, and not likely to grow anymore, save sideways." 29? Said the lad and whistled. "Why, you are quite old as my uncle Iorlas. Still," he added hopefully, "I wager I could stand you on your head or lay you on your back." "Maybe you could if I let you," said Pippin with a laugh, "and maybe I could do the same to you. We know some wrestling tricks in my little country." "Well, let me tell you, I am considered uncommonly large and strong, and I have never allowed anyone to stand me on my head." Not only was wrestling a sport seen in both the Shire and in Gondor, but it is possibly the oldest sport referenced in all of Arda. For in the Silmarillion, we are told of the mighty Tulkas, known as the champion of the Valar. Greatest in strength and deeds of prowess is Tulkas, who is surnamed Astaldo, the Valiant. He came last to Arda, to aid the Valar in the first battles with Melkor. He delights in wrestling and in contests of strength, and he rides no steed, for he can outrun all things that go on feet, and he is tireless. Next, we have 2 games whose origins in our own world are incredibly ancient. First is the game of chess. This game of strategy and skill is referenced twice in the pages of The Lord of the Rings. First by Gandalf the White during his days in Gondor. "The board is set, and the pieces are moving. One piece that I greatly desire to find is Faramir, now the heir of Denethor. I do not think that he is in the city, but I have had no time to gather news. I must go, Pippin. I must go to this Lord's Council and learn what I can. But the enemy has the move, and he is about to open his full game. And pawns are likely to see as much of it as any peregrine son of Paladin, soldier of Gondor. Sharpen your blade." Later, referencing this very speech by Gandalf, Pippin would convey his feeling of inadequacy as he sees Beregond before the great battle of Minas Tirith. Pippin looked at him, tall and proud and noble, as all the men that he had yet seen in that land, and with a glitter in his eye as he thought of the battle. Alas, my own hand feels as light as a feather, he thought, but he said nothing. A pawn, did Gandalf say? Perhaps, but I am on the wrong chessboard. Next, we see a game not of strategy and skill, but one of chance. We will occasionally hear a character reference the throwing of dice, and while this typically does not refer to the actual game itself, the phrases certainly imply the existence of dice games. One comes in the tale of Turin Turambar, where we read, "And Niniel was comforted, and she rejoiced in the renown of Turambar. But he sat in thought, and he said in his heart, The die is cast. Now comes the test, in which my boast shall be made good or fail utterly." We find another reference to dice during Gandalf's time in Rohan, after healing King Theoden. "Nay, Eomer, you do not fully understand the mind of Master Wormtongue," said Gandalf, turning his piercing glance upon him. "He is bold and cunning. Even now he plays a game with peril and wins a throw. Hours of my precious time he has wasted already." And last of all, we have what is probably the most famous game in Middle-earth, the Riddle Game of the Hobbits. There is, of course, the iconic game found in Riddles in the Dark, between Bilbo Baggins and Gollum, with the high stakes of Bilbo's life on the line. Likely having far less wagered on the outcome, this game was an ancient one among the Hobbit folk. The fact that Bilbo, a Shire Hobbit, and Gollum, a 500-year-old Stoor Hobbit of the Vales of Anduin, were both familiar with the game and were familiar with some of the same riddles implies as much. Knowing this, we can safely conclude that the Riddle Game predates the year 1356 of the Third Age, when Stoorish hobbits fled Eriador due to the threat of the realm of Angmar. Along with their people, they would take the tradition of the Riddle Game with them, allowing Gollum and Bilbo to partake in their contest well over 1,500 years later. While games and sports may not be the first things fans think of when daydreaming about Middle-earth, they were clearly a part of the various cultures of Arda. But what Middle-earth game would you most enjoy? And were there any that I missed? Perhaps we should count other games, like Gimli and Legolas counting orc kills, or young Gondorians pretending to be orcs in Tolkien's unfinished sequel, The New Shadow. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Freya Firestar, Chris and Meg Q, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.